MMA legends, in this video, we're going to be talking about Michael Chandler. There's just been a lot of talk this week going on about the absolute embarrassment that is the human being of Jon Jones, and I just think we would park that for a minute, okay? You know, like, especially since Jon Jones has just done an interview saying that he would rather vacate his belt than fight the interim champion, Tom Aspinall. It's a little bit crazy just how bad things have gone for Jones this week. But there is also one other person in the MMA community that seems to be spiraling into madness as well, and that is Michael Chandler. Specifically an interview that Chandler just did with Ariel Helwani that I found particularly hilarious. That is what we're going to be looking at today. Now, I'm thinking of calling this video Michael Chandler's last fight, because really where Chandler is in his career right now, UFC 309 might be the most important moment in Michael Chandler's career when you look at everything that has led up to it, his age, and where he is in the sport. So firstly, let's just set this up, right? Like, where is Michael Chandler today in the UFC, in the world of MMA? He's 38 years old, and we could say that his best win in the UFC is against Tony Ferguson. And Michael Chandler is also ranked, I think he's number 6th in the lightweight division, one of the UFC's most competitive divisions, or at least it was. Well, let's just park that for a minute. One of the UFC's most competitive divisions. Now, when you look at his best win being Tony Ferguson, this isn't like Tony Ferguson of old. This was right in the center of Tony Ferguson's absolute winless streak. He's almost record-breaking loss streak. And in that streak of Tony Ferguson losses, Michael Chandler was losing the first round against Tony Ferguson. So even his best win on his resume in the UFC has got that little asterisk next to it, where in the midst of Tony looking as bad as Tony has ever looked, you lost a round to that guy. That is where Chandler is at. Then he's number 6 ranking in the lightweight division. He has been inactive and had ring rust for I think he's been inactive for 2 years now, right? So he's a 38-year-old that hasn't gone into the cage and fought anybody in 2 years. He is clinging for life at where he is in the rankings. And then when you just look at the number itself, 38 years old in the lightweight division, it's really not a good age to be a lightweight fighter. Lightweight is usually like 29, 30, all the way up to 33. 34 is really pushing it. To add on an extra 4 years onto that, it's not a good look for Michael Chandler. So he's going in there, right, against Charles Oliveira. Now, Charles Oliveira, whether or not you want to say he's done, whether or not you want to say he's towards the end of his career, whether or not you want to say, oh yeah, he's a similar age, just a little bit younger, Charles Oliveira was a guillotine and a death stroke away. Charles Oliveira was this close to working himself up being to a legitimate number 1 contender again. That fight between Charles Oliveira and Arman Tsarukyan was a razor close fight. There are still people out there who think that Charles Oliveira deserved the win at the end of the day, even if he didn't land that guillotine. What we are talking about here is Michael Chandler stepping in there against a Charles Oliveira who could be challenging for a title right now, which means you have got a aged out ring rust fighter that hasn't been seen in front of the media, the fans for 2 years. He's been sitting on his hands for 2 years, going in there against an absolute killer. And when Chandler steps in there, if he doesn't win this fight, where do you go at someone who barely deserves to be in the rankings, barely deserves to be number 6 in the rankings? At 38 years old, moving on to, your 40s at lightweight, with your best win being Tony Ferguson, where do you really go from there? How does your legacy stand after that if you lose this weekend, Chandler? You will be known as the guy who sat on the sidelines for 2 years and watched his career sort of sail by, especially when lightweight was in this position where people like Dustin Poirier were getting a title shot off 1 win. Just because lightweight was a little bit stagnant during your time that you could have been in there competing. You could have gone in there and fought Islam Makhachev for a belt, when rather you just sat out. That is the sort of pressure that is on Chandler's back when he goes into this fight. And Chandler under pressure, I don't know if he performs well, because the guy seems to be more of a motivational speaker than just a get in there and beat people up sort of guy. Like, he's entertaining. He's very entertaining, but I don't know if the fight IQ is there. Do you know what I mean? Let's have a look at this interview with Ariel Helwani, which was just sort of mind-blowing to me to see what he said during it. Check this out.
Yeah, didn't watch the second round. Second round was Sure.
Me making this really silly mistake that I have since cleaned up. And I was too young, man. Even though I was old, I was too young. I was too new in the sport. I had 2.5 minutes of Octagon experience, 2.5 minutes of UFC cage time. And man, not only have I just grown as a fighter, but obviously these last year and a half, it'll be 2 years that I've been out of the Octagon, out of competition. So many things I've changed, and so many things I've worked on, and so many things I've...
Yeah, that's right. You heard that properly. He said he was too young. He was too young in the sport. You might not know this if you only watch UFC, but Chandler had been in Bellator for like the best part of a decade. And if you don't know what Bellator is, Bellator was a reasonably competitive B-League organization that got bought up by the PFL, and then the PFL ruined it. Bellator was essentially Masters UFC, where UFC veterans who still had a pretty good name, but they weren't really competitive against the young guns. People like, how Cowboy wants to come back and fight, and how Masvidal wants to come back and fight, but we don't really have anywhere to put them. Well, there used to be this thing called Bellator, and old fighters used to be able to go there and fight some average young up-and-comers, and Chandler was one of those average young up-and-comers and used to get wins over these old UFC masters. It was a really, really nice setup before the PFL came in, bought it all, and took out elbows and put in a yearly ranking system and absolutely ruined everything and couldn't sell a fight if you gave them $500 million. But anyway, Chandler was in there for the best part of a decade. He was a Bellator champion. And here he is, acting like the fact that the UFC happens in an octagon and not a circle like it did in Bellator bloody changes everything, mate. Like, I was too young in the sport. This is a classic Michael Chandler moment where we realize he is indeed not the smartest bloke in any room, even if it was just a room between him and Tito Ortiz. I think being in Bellator and having Tito Ortiz next to him might have rubbed off whatever the hell Tito Ortiz has. I think during these interviews this week, we are probably going to hear a sentence from Michael Chandler, right? Saying how he trains 8 days a week, 4 days a week, I train 3 days a week, and then the other 5 days, I train 3 days a week. So by the end of it all, I train 8 days a week. I wouldn't be surprised if Michael Chandler says something like that. He thinks only being in the UFC Octagon counts as MMA experience. Even though he was in, it really blows my mind that he said something like that. He sat around waiting forever for the Conor McGregor fight, building up all this ring rust, wishing that he was back in there. And when he does finally have fight week coming up, he talks about how he was too young and now he's completely changed everything. I don't know if you guys have ever heard this saying, but I don't think you can teach an old dog new tricks. You know what I'm saying? And Michael Chandler is the oldest dog in the lightweight playground. So saying that I've taken 2 years off to go and practice fighting rather than actually fighting, and now I'm going to step up to a peaking Charles Oliveira that was a guillotine away from being able to go and challenge for the title again. Someone who on some people's list is one of the top 3, top 5 lightweights of all time. It's a scary proposition for Michael Chandler. This is a must-win fight for him. Otherwise, I do think it is retirement. And if he does want to coax Conor McGregor into a fight, which I don't think there is any chance in hell of Conor McGregor ever fighting Michael Chandler. There is a slim chance that Conor McGregor ever comes back to the UFC. And if he does come back to the UFC are going to try and wrap a BMF belt around him for any sort of marketing to help boost the profit numbers on a Conor McGregor pay-per-view because of the amount of money that they have to pay Conor McGregor. And Michael Chandler, he just doesn't have it. If there's no way that it's going to be Conor McGregor versus Michael Chandler. If it's anything, it's going to be Conor McGregor versus Max Holloway for the BMF belt. If anything at all. If Conor even does come back, we will see. So Michael Chandler's hopes and dreams of everything that he has going forward in this sport, purely because of his age, how long he has sat out, where he is in the rankings, and he does not deserve to be there, they all hinge on this fight this weekend. And it is massive, massive pressure on the shoulders of Michael Chandler, which makes this fight so interesting, so tasty. This is one of those fights that gets me as an MMA fan super excited because of how much is on the line, because of the storylines of the two fighters that we are about to go in there and watch. And I love it. And I'm amped for this fight. But it's just sort of getting overshadowed by the absolute walking embarrassment that is Jon Jones. So I wanted to bring some light to it. Let me know down there in the comments. A percentage chance, what do you think Michael Chandler's odds are of winning this fight? Are you giving him a 50% chance? Are you giving him a 10% chance? I'm not rating him, but I think there is a 30% chance of Michael Chandler winning this fight. I think Oliveira has got it on the ground, on the striking, on the range, on the age, on the speed, on the fight IQ. I think in any way that MMA counts, if we had a UFC 5 stat sheet in front of us, anything that that Michael Chandler can do, Oliveira can do better, except maybe wrestling. But again, MMA wrestling, very different to Olympic wrestling when there is a cage behind you. You know what I mean? I think Oliveira can handle him pretty much anywhere except for just basic collegiate wrestling, which sort of gets negated in the UFC because we have a cage that people can post up against and use for scrambles and stand up. We've seen it 1,000 times. You guys know what I'm talking about. So put it down there in the comments. What do you think Michael Chandler's percentage chance of beating Charles Oliveira is? If you enjoyed this video, g'day, my name is Dougie. I try and make an MMA video every single day, and I go live about 3 times a week. So if you want to join me for that, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell so you know that when I go live. And if you're already part of the team, boys, help me grow this channel and hit that like button down there so this video pushes out to more people. And I will see you all in the next one. See ya.